was 19. I babysat for a family in my neighborhood about 4 streets down from where I lived with my parents. The family had 2 daughters. I'll call them Emma and Sophia. Their dad, Mark, was a single father who worked second shift at a manufacturing plant. He'd hired me through a neighborhood Facebook group after his usual sitter moved away. I'd been watching the girls twice a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays meet from about 5 p.m. until Mark got home around 11:30 p.m. or midnight. The pay was decent and the girls were sweet, so it worked out well for me, since I was taking online classes at the time. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with a finished basement, where the girls had their playroom. Emma was into arts and crafts, always wanting to paint or make friendship bracelets. Sophia liked to read and would usually curl up with a book after dinner. Mark had been raising them alone for about 2 years after his wife passed away from cancer. He didn't talk about it much, but the girls would mention their mom sometimes in passing. One Thursday evening in October, I had just finished making the girls chicken nuggets and mac and cheese for dinner. We were in the kitchen cleaning up when Sophia asked if she could go upstairs to get her library book. Emma wanted to watch a Disney movie in the living room, so I told Sophia to come back down after she grabbed it. I was loading the dishwasher when Emma called me from the living room. She said someone was at the front door. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing on the porch, probably in his 40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I didn't recognize him. I didn't open the door, but I called out and asked who it was. He said he was Mark's brother and needed to pick up some tools from the garage. I'd never heard Mark mention a brother, and Mark had never said anyone would be coming by. I told him I'd need to call Mark first to confirm. He raised his voice and told me I was wasting his time. Mark was expecting him. I stepped away from the door and called Mark. He answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation. Mark's voice got serious immediately. He said he didn't have a brother and told me not to open the door under any circumstances. He said he was calling the police and would leave work to come home. I hung up and went back to check the peephole. The man was gone. I locked the deadbolt and told Emma to come into the kitchen with me. Sophia came back downstairs with her book. I had both girls sit at the kitchen table. I didn't want to scare them, so I just said we were going to stay in the kitchen for a little while. Emma asked where the man at the door went, and I told her he left. About 10 minutes passed. I was sitting with the girls and trying to keep them distracted with a card game when I heard something at the back door. The back door was off the kitchen, leading to a small deck and the backyard. I stood up and looked at the door. The handle was turning. Someone was trying to open it. I had locked it earlier like I always did, but seeing the handle move made my stomach drop. The girls noticed and Sophia asked what was wrong. I told them to stay seated and be quiet. I watched the door handle stop moving. Then I heard footsteps on the deck walking away. I went to the window and tried to see outside, but it was dark and the back porch light wasn't on. I kept the light off and stayed by the window. I brought both girls into the downstairs bathroom, which had no windows, and locked the door. We sat on the floor and Emma started crying, asking for her dad. Sophia was quiet, but I could tell she was scared. I kept my phone in my hand and checked the time. Mark had called the police about 15 minutes ago. I didn't know how long it would take for them to arrive. The 3 of us sat there in silence. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard what sounded like gravel crunching in the driveway. I couldn't tell if it was him walking around or if it was a car pulling up. Emma was holding onto my arm. A few seconds later, I heard car doors closing and heavy footsteps on the front porch. Someone knocked hard on the front door and a voice called out that it was the police. I unlocked the bathroom door and brought the girls with me to the front of the house. I looked through the peephole first and saw 2 uniformed officers standing there. I opened the door and one of them asked if we were okay. I nodded and told them what had happened. They asked me to stay inside with the girls while they checked the property. Mark pulled into the driveway while the officers were still walking the perimeter of the house. He rushed inside and hugged both girls, then asked me if everyone was all right. The officers came back and said they didn't find anyone, but they did find pry marks on the frame of the basement window. One of them took photos while the other one spoke with Mark outside. When they were done, Mark came back in and explained to me that the man was likely someone his late wife had a restraining order against years ago, an ex-boyfriend who'd harassed her before she and Mark got married. Mark said he thought the guy had moved out of state, but he must have come back. The police were going to check security cameras from neighboring houses to try to identify him. Mark completely understood that I didn't want to babysit there anymore after that. He paid me for the night and thanked me for keeping the girls safe. I heard from a neighbor a few weeks later that Mark had installed a full security system with cameras. I don't know if they ever caught the guy. The whole thing left me paranoid for months about locking doors and checking windows. It was a terrifying experience that I still think about sometimes. When I was 9, my parents hired a babysitter to watch me and my older brother for a long weekend. I'm 15 now, so some of the details are hazy, but I remember enough to know it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. My parents were going to my uncle's wedding about 4 hours away and decided it would be easier to leave us at home rather than drag us along. The babysitter was a college student named Parker, who was the son of someone my dad worked with. He was 21 and studying photography or film, something like that. My brother was 12 at the time, so my parents figured between Parker and my brother being almost a teenager, we'd be fine for 3 days. Parker arrived on Friday afternoon before my parents left. He seemed nice enough. He had a camera bag with him and explained to my parents that he had some homework to work on for a class, but it wouldn't interfere with watching us. My parents were fine with it. They went over the usual rules, showed him where everything was, and left around 4 p.m. Friday night went by without anything strange happening. Parker ordered Chinese food for dinner and let us watch a movie. My brother spent most of the evening texting his friends and went to his room early. I stayed up watching TV with Parker. He asked me questions about school and what I liked to do. I told him I was really into skateboarding and collecting trading cards. He said skateboarding was cool and he used to do it when he was younger. Saturday was when I started noticing Parker acting strange. My brother had gone to his friend's house down the street for most of the day, so it was just me and Parker at home. He kept following me from room to room. If I went to the kitchen to get a snack, he'd come in a minute later. If I went to the living room to play video games, he'd sit on the couch behind me and just watch. When I asked if he wanted to play, he said no, he just liked watching me play. At one point, I went to my room to look for one of my skateboarding magazines, and Parker appeared in the doorway. He asked if he could come in and see my room. I said okay because I didn't know how to say no to an adult. He walked around looking at my stuff, picking up my toys and action figures. Then he sat down on my bed and started asking me weird questions. He asked if I had a girlfriend, which I thought was a strange thing to ask a 9-year-old. I said no. He asked if any girls at school liked me. I shrugged. Then he asked if I'd ever let anyone take pictures of me. I didn't understand the question and just said my parents took photos of me sometimes. He nodded and said he'd like to take some pictures of me for a project. I said maybe later and left the room. The rest of Saturday I tried to stay outside in the backyard, but Parker kept coming out to check on me. He'd stand on the back deck and watch me. When I came back inside, he asked again about the pictures. I told him I didn't really want to. That night I went to bed around 9 p.m. I woke up sometime later, and my bedroom door was open. I always slept with it closed. I sat up and looked around my dark room but didn't see anything. I got up to close the door, and when I stepped into the hallway, I saw Parker standing at the end of the hall. He was just standing there in the dark. When he saw me, he said he was just checking to make sure I was asleep. I closed my door and locked it. The next morning my brother came home, and I stayed close to him for the rest of the day. Parker seemed different on Sunday, quieter, more distant. He barely spoke to us. He made us sandwiches for lunch, and then spent most of the afternoon in the guest room where he was staying. I heard him on the phone at one point talking to someone, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. My parents came home that evening around 6 p.m. Parker talked to them for a minute. They paid him, and he left. My mom asked how the weekend went, and I said it was fine. My brother said it was boring. Neither of us mentioned anything unusual. I never told my parents about Parker watching me, or standing in the hallway at night. I didn't know how to explain why it bothered me so much. Nothing technically happened, but the whole weekend felt wrong in a way I couldn't put into words as a kid. Even now, I struggle to explain exactly what made Parker so unsettling. I just knew I felt relief when he left, and I never wanted to see him again. I think about it sometimes and wonder if I should have said something. It's one of those things I've carried with me for years, not quite sure what to make of it, but knowing it wasn't right. I'm 17 now, but when I was 11, my younger sister and I had a babysitter one night that I still think about sometimes. My parents both had to attend a funeral for my dad's coworker about 2 hours away. The funeral was late in the afternoon, and they'd planned to stay for the reception after, so they needed someone to watch us for the evening. My sister was 8. I'll call her Jay. The woman babysitting us was named Diane. Diane went to the same gym as my mom, and they'd talked a few times in spin class or something. My mom didn't know her that well, but when my mom mentioned needing a sitter, Diane offered to help out. My mom was relieved because it was last minute, and our usual sitter was unavailable. Diane showed up around 4:30 p.m. with a large tote bag. My parents were already dressed and ready to leave. The babysitter was overly chatty, asking my parents a ton of questions about the house, where things were, what our routines looked like. Diane kept complimenting everything, the furniture, the kitchen, even our family photos on the wall. My mom seemed a little put off by how much talking was happening, but thanked Diane for coming on short notice. My parents left around 5 p.m. As soon as they were gone, Diane's whole attitude shifted. The smiling stopped. Diane asked Jay and I what we wanted for dinner, and we said pizza. The response was that ordering would happen in a bit, but first there was a need to settle in. The tote bag went upstairs. I thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it at the time. Jay and I were watching TV in the living room when I realized Diane had been upstairs for a while. I went up to see what was going on. The hallway was empty, but I could hear movement coming from my parents' bedroom. The door was halfway open. I saw Diane going through my mom's jewelry box on the dresser. A necklace was being held up to the light, examined. Then one of my mom's drawers opened and the contents were being sorted through. I must have made a noise because Diane turned around and saw me. There was no surprise or embarrassment on the babysitter's face, just a smile and an explanation about looking for a hair tie, claiming to have forgotten to bring one. I didn't say anything. The necklace went back, and Diane walked past me out of the room. I went back downstairs and told Jay that Diane was going through Mom's stuff. Jay asked why, and I said I didn't know. Diane came down a few minutes later, acted like nothing happened. The pizza got ordered, and the three of us sat on the couch while we waited for it to arrive. The pizza came around 6:30 p.m. We ate in the kitchen. Diane kept asking us questions about our parents, where they worked, what kind of car they drove, if they traveled a lot. I gave vague answers because something felt wrong. After we finished eating, Diane said something about needing to use the bathroom and went upstairs again. I waited a minute, then followed. This time the babysitter wasn't in my parents' room. The home office down the hall was occupied instead. I could see through the crack in the door. Diane was at my dad's desk, opening drawers and looking through papers. A folder appeared and got flipped through. I pushed the door open and asked what was going on. Diane looked up and the expression went cold. The excuse was about looking for a pen. I said there were pens in the kitchen. The folder closed and Diane stood up, walked toward me and said, I shouldn't be sneaking up on people. It was rude. The tone was completely different from earlier. There was no more attempt at being friendly. I went back downstairs and told Jay we needed to call Mom and Dad. Jay asked why, and I said because Diane was acting creepy and going through their stuff. Jay looked scared. I went to grab the house phone from the kitchen, but it wasn't on the charger. I checked the other rooms but couldn't find it. Diane came downstairs and asked what I was looking for. I said the phone. The response was that it had been moved because it was ringing earlier and the noise would disturb us. I asked where it was and Diane said it would be retrieved in a minute. We were told to go back to watching TV. I didn't trust her. I went to my room to get my dad's old cell phone that he let me keep for emergencies. It didn't have service, but I could still use it to call 911. When I opened my desk drawer where I kept it, the phone was gone. I knew I'd left it there. Diane must have taken it during one of those trips upstairs. I went to Jay's room and told her we needed to leave. Jay started crying and asked where we'd go. I said we'd go to our neighbor's house across the street. I told her we'd go out the back door. We went downstairs as quietly as we could. Diane was in the living room on the phone. I could hear a conversation with someone. Something about having time to grab more once the kids were asleep. We slipped into the kitchen and out the back door. We ran across the backyard and through the gate to the front. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was outside getting her mail. I ran up to her and told her our babysitter was going through our house and stealing things. Mrs. Chen brought us inside and called my parents. My dad answered, and Mrs. Chen explained the situation. He said they were leaving immediately and to call the police. Mrs. Chen called 911. 2 officers arrived before my parents got home. They went to our house and found Diane still there. I don't know exactly what happened next because Mrs. Chen kept us at her house, but I saw the officers walk Diane out to their car. The babysitter had the tote bag, and one of the officers was carrying a box of our stuff. My parents got home about an hour later. They were upset and kept apologizing to us. We found out later that Diane had taken several pieces of my mom's jewelry, some cash from my dad's office, and a few other small items. Both phones had been taken, so we couldn't call for help. The police arrested Diane and my parents pressed charges. I don't know what ended up happening with the case because my parents didn't talk about it much after that. Jay had nightmares for weeks. My parents felt terrible for leaving us with someone they barely knew. We never had another babysitter after that night.